My name is Julia Foster. I'm 32, and I've worked my whole life just to feel calm, a steady job, a small apartment in Orlando, a father who still calls every Sunday. I thought I'd finally built peace, the kind no one could take away. Then one autumn evening, someone knocked on my door, 3 knocks, firm, familiar. When I opened it, the past walked in, wearing perfume that smelled like regret. It was my mother, Marie, the woman who left me and my dad when I was 9. Beside her stood a young man, scrolling his phone, not even looking up. "My sweet girl," she said, smiling like 20 years hadn't passed. "You've done so well. Caleb's college tuition is $60,000. We just need a little help. Maybe $3,000 a month." I froze. No apology. No, "How have you been?" Just numbers, as if I were a bank. And that's when it hit me. Some people don't come back for love. They come back for what love built. If you've ever had someone reappear only after you finally made it, you'll understand what that moment feels like. Please, hit the like button if you've ever had to protect your peace, alone. And subscribe if you believe family should mean care, not cost. Because stories like this remind us that love isn't measured in money. Her voice kept playing in my head. We just need a little help. The same woman who left us hungry, now asking me to feed her comfort. Her son, my half-brother, finally looked up and sneered, "Nice place. Kinda small for someone making 6 figures. The arrogance in his tone felt like a slap. And my mother, she just sat there smiling, pretending this was some kind of reunion. But I saw it. The way her eyes darted across my furniture, the watch on my wrist, the framed photos of my dad. She wasn't there to reconnect. She was there to collect. And I should have closed the door, but I didn't. Because somewhere deep inside, the 9-year-old girl in me still wanted her mother to stay this time. What I didn't know was that opening that door would lead to something far darker, something that would test not just my trust, but everything I believed family meant. After that night, when the door closed behind her, I couldn't sleep. The sound of her voice had dragged me back to a time I'd tried so hard to forget. I was 9 when she left. It was a gray afternoon in Ohio, the kind that smelled like rain and dust. I remember standing in the hallway watching her pack her suitcase, the blue one with the missing zipper. She didn't look at me. She didn't say goodbye. Just the sound of the front door closing, and my father whispering my name, his voice trembling. "It's just us now, kiddo." That night, I learned what silence sounds like. My dad, David Foster, ran a small roadside diner, the kind of place where coffee was always burnt, and bacon always crisp. He worked from dawn to midnight, his hands cracked and stained from the grill. I used to sit on the counter, watching him flip pancakes for truckers and tired factory workers, his eyes heavy, but kind. Sometimes he'd give me a wink and say, "If you can solve this math problem before I flip the next pancake, breakfast's on me." That was how we survived. One pancake, one laugh, one long night at a time. But behind his smile, I saw the worry. Bills piled up on the fridge, rent notices slipped under the door. There were nights when he skipped dinner so I could have seconds. I pretended not to notice. I'd just hug him tighter and say I wasn't hungry either. By 13, I started helping, babysitting, cleaning houses, stocking shelves. I'd ride my bike in the dark, newspapers stacked in the basket, the cold biting at my fingers. Every dollar I earned went into a jar labeled "for Dad." When I handed him my first $50, he looked like he wanted to cry. "You shouldn't have to do this," he said. "Neither should you," I answered. We never said "I love you" much. We didn't have time for words like that. But love was there, in the way he covered me with his jacket when I fell asleep in the diner booth. Love was in the extra pancake he made by accident every morning. Still, even with him beside me, I felt a hole where she used to be. Every year on my birthday, a card came in the mail, same handwriting, same 4 words, "Happy birthday. Stay strong. No call, no visit, just a cold signature, Marie." I'd stare at those cards, wondering what kind of mother sends paper instead of presents. One year, I ripped one in half and threw it away. The next, I kept it. Maybe I thought if I collected enough of them, it would add up to something like love. By high school, I'd stopped waiting for her. My world became numbers, equations, certainty, things that didn't walk away. While other kids went to parties, I stayed in the library. When they talked about prom, I thought about scholarships. My dad would look at me, pride and worry mixed in his eyes. "You don't have to save the world, Jules. Just ours," I'd say. And somehow, I did. I graduated top of my class, got a full scholarship for data analysis, and promised Dad I'd make it all mean something. He hugged me that day, his apron still smelling of bacon and coffee, and whispered, "Go live a life she'll wish she hadn't missed." Those words became my compass. But even after I left Ohio, even after the degrees, the promotions, the clean apartment, part of me stayed in that diner, wiping tables beside him. Because that's where I learned what family truly meant. Not someone who gives you life, but someone who stays to help you live it. And that's why, years later, when my mother showed up smiling at my door, asking for money like nothing happened, it hurt in a way no salary could fix. Because I didn't just remember what she took, I remembered who had to pay for it. When I left Ohio, I didn't just leave home. I left behind the diner's smell of coffee and bacon, the echo of my father's tired footsteps, and the ghost of a woman who'd taught me what emptiness sounded like. I carried only 2 suitcases, a worn-out photo of Dad, and the kind of determination you can't fake, the kind that grows out of hunger and heartbreak. The campus felt too big for a girl who'd never traveled beyond the county line. My dorm room was plain, the mattress thin, the walls too white. But it was mine. No shouting, no slammed doors, no waiting for someone who never came back. That first night, I sat by the window watching the city lights and whispered, "We made it, Dad." Classes started, and with them came reality. Tuition didn't cover everything. I worked 3 jobs. Mornings at a campus cafe, afternoons answering phones at a small law firm, and nights cleaning offices until my legs ached. My hands always smelled of coffee, or disinfectant. My clothes never stopped smelling like exhaustion. Every dollar was planned to the cent. Books, rent, food, nothing for fun. But every time I thought about quitting, I saw Dad's hands, cracked, blistered, sliding another plate across the diner counter, smiling for customers who never knew how close we were to losing everything. I couldn't give up, not after all he'd done. On weekends, when other students went home to visit their parents, I stayed behind, studying under the dull light of a desk lamp. I'd call Dad, and he'd ask the same questions every time. "You eating enough?" "Trying to." "You sleeping?" "Sometimes." Then he'd laugh softly. "You sound just like me." That laugh was everything. It reminded me why I was fighting, not for revenge, but for relief, for the chance to give him the peace he never had. By my junior year, I landed a summer internship at a small tech startup. The first time I sat behind a computer running real data models, I felt something click inside me. Numbers didn't lie. They didn't abandon you. They didn't promise one thing and do another. Numbers told the truth, clean and sharp. They became my language, my way out. Graduation came faster than I expected. I walked across the stage with a full scholarship, a job offer in hand, and Dad in the crowd, wearing his diner apron under a borrowed jacket. He clapped so hard his hands turned red. When I found him afterward, he hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. "You did it, kiddo." "We did it," I said. That night, we ate at a cheap pizza place. He insisted on paying with crumpled bills and told the waiter, "My daughter's the smartest woman in the room." I laughed, but inside I promised myself I'd make that true, not just for him, but for every version of me that had ever felt small. When I moved to Orlando for my new job, I expected excitement. What I felt instead was silence, the kind that hums in the corners of an empty apartment. But over time, I filled it with routine, with purpose, with life. I threw myself into work, learning everything I could, saying yes to every project. My team became my family. My first paycheck felt like gold in my hands. I sent half to Dad with a note that simply said, "For the roof, the fridge, and everything you ever gave me." He called that night, his voice cracking through static. "You didn't have to send this. I wanted to. That's why you're you." The months rolled into years. Promotions came. My salary grew. I upgraded from instant noodles to dinners that didn't come from a microwave. I bought my own car, a modest sedan, but it ran without making strange noises. I even framed one of Dad's old diner menus and hung it above my desk, a reminder of where I started. Sometimes, though, when the city got too quiet, I'd think about her, my mother, wondering if she ever thought of me. Her cards still arrived once a year, short and cold. "Happy birthday. Hope you're well." I kept them in a drawer I rarely opened, not out of love, maybe just proof that she remembered I existed. Then one day I came home from work, set down my laptop, and found a new message notification on my phone. The name made my heart stop. Marie Stone. For a moment I thought it had to be a mistake, but the message was simple, chilling in its smallness. "Heard you're doing great. We should catch up." Just 10 words. 10 words that opened a door I thought I'd sealed shut. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. She had missed my childhood, my graduation, my first job, my every triumph. And now she wanted to catch up? I didn't reply that night. I told myself I wouldn't. But her name lingered in my mind, like a whisper you can't unhear. Because the truth is, no matter how far you go or how high you climb, if your wounds have a name, they'll always know where to find you. And soon, mine would come knocking. I didn't answer her message that night. I told myself I wouldn't. But every time I opened my phone, her name was there, glowing like a ghost I'd tried to bury. Marie Stone. Those 10 words. "Heard you're doing great. We should catch up." Clung to me like a whisper I couldn't silence. For a week, I ignored it. I went to work, smiled through meetings, ate dinner alone at my small kitchen table. But some nights, I'd look at her name again and wonder, what if she really changed? The rational part of me knew better, but the child in me, the one who used to wait by the window for her shadow, still wanted to believe. So one Thursday evening, when the sun was bleeding out over the city skyline, I typed back one word. "Okay." We met that Saturday at a cafe near Lake Eola. The smell of roasted beans, rain on pavement, the hum of quiet chatter. Everything felt too calm, like the world didn't know it was about to tilt. When she walked in, I froze. Her hair had gone gray at the roots. Her eyes were sharper than I remembered, but her smile, that same calculated warmth, hadn't aged a day. "Julia," she said softly, stepping toward me. "You're even more beautiful than I imagined." For a second I couldn't speak. The last time I saw her, she was walking out the door with a suitcase, and a new life waiting somewhere else. Now she stood in front of me, crying, touching my face like she'd earned the right. "I've missed you every day," she whispered. "Your father? He made it impossible to reach you. He kept you away from me." The words felt rehearsed, but I stayed quiet. Maybe I wanted to see where the act would go. Then she leaned in, voice trembling just enough to sound human. "Caleb's starting college. Things have been hard. I just need a little help. A few thousand to get him started." Caleb, my half-brother, the one I'd never met. I hesitated, unsure how to respond, and that's when he appeared, tall, broad-shouldered, a phone in his hand, smirk already in place. "Nice to finally meet you," he said, eyes scanning my clothes, my watch, my face. "Mom said you were doing well." It wasn't a greeting, it was an assessment. They spoke of family and forgiveness as if the two were the same thing, and against my better judgment, I let a flicker of hope rise. The foolish kind that still believed maybe, just maybe, we could start again. Before leaving, Mom hugged me. Her perfume was strong, artificial, too sweet. "Let's not lose touch again," she said. "We're family." But something in her tone, the way she said family, made my stomach twist. 2 days later, she called again. Her voice was soft, persuasive. "Julia, can we come by?" Just for a quick visit, I didn't want to. but she sounded fragile. So, I said yes. When the doorbell rang, I saw the same smile, the same eyes darting around my apartment, taking everything in, the framed degree on the wall, the laptop on my desk, the new furniture. "It's beautiful," she said, setting down a pie box. "You've done so well." Caleb kicked off his shoes, flopped onto my couch, scrolling his phone. "Not bad," he muttered. "Thought it'd be bigger, for someone making 6 figures." The comment stung, but I swallowed it. Mom's tone turned syrupy. "Julia, honey, Caleb's tuition is heavy on us. Maybe you could help, just a few thousand each month until we're steady again?" I stared at her. "You haven't seen me in 23 years. You don't ask how I've been. You don't ask about Dad. And the first thing you want is money." Her smile tightened. "Don't be dramatic. Family helps family," Caleb scoffed. "Guess success makes people forget where they came from." I stood up, heart pounding. I didn't forget. I just learned to live without begging. The silence after that was sharp enough to cut glass. They left soon after, but the unease lingered. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. So when my doorbell rang again the next evening, my stomach sank. They were back. "Julia," Mom said, voice overly sweet, "we just wanted to talk again." I hesitated, then stepped aside. My mistake. As I poured them water, Caleb wandered toward my desk. I heard the faint click of a keyboard. When I turned, my blood went cold. He was staring at my open laptop, and on the screen, my online banking page. "What are you doing?" I demanded. He shrugged. "Relax. Just curious." Mom's tone snapped. Defensive. "Don't be so uptight. You've got so much. Why hide it from us?" And that's when I saw it. My email tab open, one message highlighted, an email from my father's account, forwarded to hers, containing my salary slip. The world tilted. "You hacked Dad's email," I said slowly. Her face paled, but she didn't deny it. Instead, she straightened, eyes burning with something between shame and anger. "Your father's a failure," she spat. "I had to know how you turned out so well." My throat closed. The man who'd worked himself sick for me, reduced to a failure by the woman who'd walked out. Caleb laughed under his breath. "She's right. He's pathetic. You're better than that, Julia." Something inside me broke. I grabbed my phone. "Get out! Both of you, or I call the police." Mom's voice trembled, half threat, half plea. "You'd call the cops on your own mother?" I stared at her, this stranger who wore my mother's face, and said quietly, "You stopped being my mother a long time ago." They stormed out, slamming the door so hard the picture frames rattled. The pie box slipped off the counter, bursting open, red fillings splattered across the floor like blood on white tile. I sank to my knees, staring at the mess, my hands trembling. And for the first time in years, I cried. Not for what I lost, but for finally knowing the truth. My mother hadn't come back for me. She came back for what I'd built without her. She came back for everything I built without her. That night, the apartment felt colder than it had in years. The pie was still on the floor, its red fillings spreading across the tile, like an open wound. I cleaned it slowly, my hands shaking, my reflection trembling in the dark window. The silence pressed down heavy, the kind that doesn't comfort, only reminds you you're alone again. But this time, I wasn't that scared little girl in Ohio anymore. This time, I wasn't going to cry and wait for someone else to fix it. I opened my laptop, the same one Caleb had touched, and checked my browser history. There it was, multiple failed login attempts. My father's email opened, my financial dashboard viewed. They hadn't just crossed a line, they'd broken into my life. I called my father first. His voice was calm, but I could hear the ache behind it. "She hacked into your email, Dad," I said quietly. He sighed, not surprised. "That's Marie. She always finds a way to twist things to her advantage. She called you a failure." There was a pause, long, heavy. Then I guess she hasn't changed at all. Something in his tone hardened me. I wasn't just fighting for me anymore. I was fighting for him. For every night he came home smelling like grease and coffee. For every year he carried both our lives on his back while she started over somewhere new. The next morning I called Mark Sullivan, my lawyer, a quiet man with sharp eyes who'd once handled a fraud case for my company. When I told him what happened, he didn't blink. "Julia, this is serious. We're not talking about family drama anymore. This is digital intrusion and financial misconduct." I sent him everything: screenshots, timestamps, forwarded emails. He looked through the evidence and said firmly, "We'll file for a restraining order immediately." The process was grueling: paperwork, hearings, explaining every painful detail under the courtroom's sterile light. Mom didn't show up for the first hearing, but her lawyer did. A smug man who tried to paint me as an ungrateful daughter. Mark leaned forward and said calmly, "Ungrateful daughters don't protect stolen bank data. Criminals do." The judge's gavel fell with a sound that felt like closure. The restraining order was granted. Permanent. They couldn't contact me, approach me, or access any part of my life again. For the first time in weeks, I exhaled. But peace doesn't come without one last test. A week later, I got a message from my bank. An attempted $10,000 transfer from my savings. It had been blocked by two-factor authentication. The name on the attempted device login made my stomach twist. Caleb Grant. They were still trying, still reaching for what wasn't theirs. I forwarded the report to Mark, who immediately filed a violation notice with the court. Their consequences were sealed after that. When the email confirming the case closure arrived, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the words. No further contact permitted. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I felt tired, like winning a war you never wanted to fight. I brewed coffee, poured it into my old chipped mug, the one Dad and I used to share in the diner. The steam rose, warm and familiar. Outside, the city was waking, soft light spilling through my window, and for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of the quiet, because the quiet finally belonged to me. If you've ever had to rebuild your peace after someone tried to take it from you, hit like so I know I'm not alone. And if you've ever learned that family isn't who shares your blood, but who protects your heart, subscribe, because stories like this are what remind us that peace isn't free, but it's worth every scar. Outside, the city lights flickered against the glass, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel anger, just clarity. They had taken everything they could, except the one thing that made me who I was, my peace. And that, I decided, was something I would never give away again. A full year passed after the restraining order. The phone stopped ringing. The inbox stayed quiet. And for the first time since I was 9 years old, I woke up without feeling like I owed anyone an explanation for my peace. I started to breathe again. The air in my apartment felt lighter, like the walls had exhaled with me. I filled my weekends with long walks by the lake, early coffee with friends, and quiet dinners with Dad over FaceTime. The shadows of the past still existed, but they no longer followed me. When spring came, Dad visited Orlando. He looked older, softer somehow, but his smile was still the same one that got me through every storm. We cooked pancakes together in my kitchen, just like the diner days. He took a bite, wrinkled his nose. Still a little overcooked. I laughed, and for the first time, the sound didn't carry pain. Guess I learned from the master. When he left that evening, he hugged me long and tight. And in that moment, I realized, after everything I lost, he was the one who never left. That was what family meant. But healing isn't just closing the door on pain, it's opening one for someone else. So I started the Diner Fund, a small scholarship for kids from single-parent homes. I wanted to help them the way my father once helped me, not with money, but with belief. One of the girls in the program once asked, "Did your mom help you become successful?" I paused, smiled softly, and said, "No, sweetheart." My success came from the people who stayed that night. I opened the wooden box I'd kept hidden for years, the one filled with my mother's old birthday cards. Each card had the same cold handwriting, the same empty words. I read them one last time, then closed the box gently and slid it into the back of my closet. Not in anger, but in peace. Because sometimes forgiveness isn't a door you reopen, it's one you finally lock and walk away from, smiling. I stood by the window, the city lights glowing below, and looked at the photo on my fridge. Dad and me, covered in flour, laughing like the world hadn't hurt us. That was family, not blood, not obligation, just love. That stays. If you've ever had to rebuild yourself after being broken by the people who should have protected you, this story is for you. Tap like if you've ever stood strong on your own, and if you believe that family is chosen, not inherited. Subscribe to this channel for more family stories that remind us, love doesn't leave. It stays quietly, faithfully, beautifully.